All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Louvel Brown, and I have the honor of serving as the superintendent of the Ithaca City School District, and welcome to Co-op Auditorium in the Ithaca City School District. We also have the honor of hosting this amazing event. Myself, along with our great Board of Education, and I think we have many of our board members in the room. If you could raise your hand, Mr. J. True's here. I know Mr. Rob Ainsley's here. Mr. Brad Granger's here. And some other board members, I think, are going to be coming in a little later. And also, partnership with the TSC BOCES, Dr. Jeff Madison's here, if you could raise your hand. And the other BOCES component district superintendents and their board members are here as well, if you could just raise your hands in the room. Thank you all for pulling this together. I'm guessing there's Rob and Brad coming in now. We just talked about you. Yeah. I'm guessing, and I've been charged with introducing our evening speaker. And I'm guessing if you're here, you've already gone online or seen the announcement, so I won't just read his bio, which is very impressive. But I will say, he's had an impact on my life. I had an opportunity to hear him speak about 8 years ago. He was at, I haven't told you this story yet, you were in the Virginia Association for School Curriculum and Development in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia, about 8 years ago. And I was a teacher at the time and a basketball coach. And I was dragged down to this conference by my principal who had been recruiting me to go into administration. Well, I like basketball and I like being a teacher. So I didn't want to do this thing I'm doing now. Snow days, I didn't want any parts of those. So he took me to this conference and he said, we need good leaders, and I just want you to hear this gentleman as he speaks about what's happening to our profession. And my mom's been a 40-year-plus teacher, and she just retired most recently, and she said we needed good leaders as well, but I wasn't listening to her. But I heard this gentleman, he spoke, he used data points, he talked about the need for thinking being embedded in our classrooms, he talked about the policy implications that would have. For me, thinking in the classroom and the policy implications associated with that, and then he also talked about technology implementations. And back then, I didn't know what an iPad was. But he was talking about mobile devices 8-10 years ago, and how it was going to be impacting teaching and learning and policy for our profession and for our country. And I will tell you, you inspired me to take that first administrative course. And one thing led to another, and now I'm here in the sub-zero temperatures of the north as an administrator. But I'm hoping, and I'm so happy that so many of you came tonight, I'm hoping that he will have as much of an impact on your lives and your thinking as he had on mine. Mr. Bill Daggett.
Thank you. The group is small, and I like to interact with you, so I'm going to stay down here. Can you, actually, more important that you almost can see my PowerPoint than me. So, good evening to everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Now, I live in Albany, New York, but I came from Lubbock, Texas to get here, and I got to go to Chicago afterwards. So something's wrong with this planning here. How many in the room have ever heard me speak before? Okay. Most of you have not, so I need to caution you. I am never politically correct. Say what's ever on my mind, it usually gets me in trouble. So just be glad after about 8 o'clock tonight, you never ever have to see me again. Show you I'm not politically correct. I recently addressed a group of our nation's governors, and when you get a lot of the governors, you get a whole lot of media in the room. So I began my presentation that day by saying, ladies and gentlemen, I am sick and tired of the media in this country. And even more so, the political arena in this country of beating up and of not supporting public education. Folks, I've been in every state in this country multiple times. I've spoken in 29 other countries. And every time I return to America, I thank God I live in America. And one of the reasons is the American public education system. Having seen it up close and personal, I believe it's the finest education system literally on the face of the earth. Now, we don't have the highest standards. If you think we have high standards, I am going to badly depress you tonight. And you might say, well, wait a minute. How can the crazy guy say we got the best schools if we don't have the highest standards? For one simple reason. Which kids in America do we educate, folks? All. And the second you educate all kids, any type of international comparisons are unfair. I judge schools not as a lifetime educator. Some of you may know I taught in this state. I was an administrator. I was with the state ed department, but I left it 25 years ago, so do not blame me on any of the present problems, okay? But I don't judge schools based upon my education experience. I judge them based upon my experience that my wife and I have had as a parents and grandparents of kids. We have 5 kids. My kids are older than your kids because my kids are older than half of the people in this auditorium. My kids are 39, 40, 41, 42, and 43. And I saw you smile, Charlie. It's okay. It's a lot better than 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. My oldest child would have made it anywhere. It's not Dad's wishful thinking. She's gifted and talented. Second one, pretty good student. Third one, he loved to go to school. He just didn't go to class. Do you have any in the region like that? But for Bonnie and I, Bonnie's my wife, it was our fourth child that helped us understand how unique American schools are. Her name is Audrey. Audrey has severe mental retardation. Audrey has autism. But Audrey's biggest disability in life is she has really, really serious epilepsy. A great day for Audrey is any day she doesn't have a grand mal seizure. And there have been very few in 40 years of her life. Do you know what it does to body and mind after 40 years? With our first 4 kids, you know the biggest accomplishment we ever had with public education in this state was? It wasn't my oldest daughter. Winning every kind of state and national award you can imagine. We were proud. It was wonderful. The greatest accomplishment is when we worked around the clock with school personnel, support system, and family. We finally got Audrey as a preteen potty trained. Now, until you lived in that arena, it's hard to comprehend. Do we have anybody in this room who presently or ever worked in the area of special education? Thank you for what you do. And people who take shots at our schools have no idea what we're asking Jeff, the BOCES, and every local school district to do. We want you to educate every child. And they're not all alike, are they? Bonnie and I had it totally figured out until child number 5. 28 years ago, last September 16th, Charlie, you may remember, Charlie and I go back about 30 years. 28 years ago, last September 16th, our youngest child stepped off of a bus, a school bus, and was run over by a drunken driver. He suffered traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma and on life support systems for 9 months. He was 11 years old. Paul lost the functions of speech and hearing. He doesn't have those capacities any longer, as you know him. He has such ataxia that he can't write, common with traumatic brain injury. But despite all those disabilities, in this country, and only in this country could it happen, he is a 4-year college graduate. He doesn't have a good job. He actually has a great job. He makes more money than his older 2 brothers, which I remind them of often. And they remind me that's because they work for me and he doesn't, okay? Paul is married and they have 3 young boys. Why do I think we have the finest schools in the world? Because no nation could have done for my 5 kids what public education in the state of New York did. But let me tell you what my family has discovered, and every school board member and superintendent in this audience, I bet you, is wrestling with. Equity is really expensive. And you can't afford equity if you don't have economic success. You cannot and you will not have economic success if you don't have relevant, and I underscore the word relevant, academic success. And therein lies what I want to talk to you about tonight. Do we really have a curriculum for today's kids that is academically rigorous enough and relevant enough to prepare them for a world that we can hardly comprehend? Superintendent said he didn't know what an iPad was. I hate to tell you, my grandchildren, we have 11 of them, my grandchildren who are preschoolers will probably never know what an iPad was. Because, see, you and I think of it as the cutting edge new thing. Can I grab it? To the kids, today's preschoolers, They're never going to see something like this except on a shelf somewhere or in a museum. Let me show you why. See, our schools aren't failing. They're getting better. You know, we graduated a high percentage of 18-year-olds in New York State last year than any year in our nation's history. And we did that despite the fact those kids had more standards to take. Forgive me, New York has never seen a standard it doesn't like. Ask any classroom teacher. And we got them all on a treadmill that we just keep turning faster and faster and saying, you better cover it all because it might be on the test. We got more tests, higher standards, and we're graduating more of them. With just one more piece. More and more children living in poverty. That's not a system that's failing. So why the call for school reform? Has anybody in the room ever heard of the Common Core learning standards? The new assessments. Why are they there? By the way, they're not new. 1983. Is anybody in the room, were any of you working in schools in 1983? Anybody know what national report came out that year about American education? The nation at risk. And New York State had two things. One was called the Regents Action Plan. And for the occupational career tech area, something called futuring. And why did we have all these things in 1983? Because one nation had technologically passed America by. Does anybody remember what nation it was in 1980s? Japan. How many in the room are so old you can remember the 1960s? Okay. Some are clearly too young. And some that didn't raise their hands over here must have been doing things in the 60s that made the entire decade look like a blur to them, okay? What did made in Japan mean in the 1960s? Cheap, junk, shoddy workmanship. By 1983, world class. How did they do it? 1983, nobody was talking about China. What did made in China mean? Junk, shoddy workmanship. Today, our fiercest economic competitor. 1990s, nobody was talking about India. Today, our second fiercest economic competitor. The governors that asked me to speak. They asked me to come and talk about something and see if you would agree. They said they thought there was a direct and intimate link between educational attainment and the probability of future economic success. How many would agree with the premise that there should be a link between educational attainment and the probability of future economic success? So they said there are 5 nations that, despite a worldwide recession, have had 5 straight years of double-digit growth in their economies. They said, will you simply come and tell us what they're doing educationally different than we are? Anybody in the room even tell me what the 5 nations are? Much less what they're doing educationally. And they are, and they may surprise you. 5 fastest growing economies in the world. Vietnam is number 1, which means something quite different to my generation. Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia. 5th one, really small country, but growing economically quickly, Panama. And China and India and Japan aren't going away. You know who is fading very quickly in the global economy? Europe. And who do we look, act, and educate most like? Europe. See, I don't think our schools are failing. I don't think they were failing back in 1983. Here's the problem. Back in 1983, we had a gap, and the gap was about right there. That gap has gotten bigger and bigger. Today's kids, how many of you have children of school age? Your kids are the best educated in our state's history and simultaneously the worst off. They are the least likely to be prepared for their future of any group of kids in this nation's history. And nobody wants to hear it. Why? Not because schools failed, but because the world outside of school, pushed by technology, pushed by globalization, is changing 4 to 5 times faster than we are. And so they're better educated, but the gap gets bigger. I'm going to try to show you tonight what the gap is and give some suggestions on how to close it. That was a very long introduction to what we're going to talk about. Now I want to find out something about you. How many in the room have a son or a daughter who is a preteen, a teen, or in their early 20s? Okay, good. For everybody just raised your hands, how many of you hope the person you just raised your hands about sometime in the next decade becomes independent? How many don't want them to be independent? And I'll show you a very sick person, okay? Let me ask you a third question. How many in the room know a recent 4-year college graduate who is now back home with mommy and her dad, or made the decision to go to graduate school because they couldn't find meaningful employment, or they're off on their own, but their parents are still having to help them financially? Hands way up, not part way up. Keep them way up high. Keep them way up. Keep them up. And anybody in the room that hasn't got their hands up, look around the rest of the auditorium. What happened, folks? These are our success stories. These are the ones we brag about on graduation night. What happened is America changed. Let me ask you one more final question. This could be very personal for some of you. How many in your room know a person with an outstanding college loan? Yeah. Keep all 4 questions in mind until 8 o'clock. Seven years ago, I accepted the chairmanship of a national commission. I head up a group called the International Center for Leadership in Education. There's a second group called the Council of Chief State School Officers. Every state in America has, as we have in New York State, a commissioner of education. John King is the New York State Commissioner of Education. Or some states don't have a commissioner, they have a state superintendent. The 50 are called the Council of Chief State School Officers. That group and my group were approached 7 years ago by the governors and a series of corporate leaders. And we were asked if we would go out across America and try to find the schools that did not look like this line, but instead looked like that line. Or ideally, that line. They said, will you go and find the 25 most rapidly improving elementary schools in America? How many have a child in elementary school? Said, trying the 25 most rapidly improving. By the way, that's out of 47,000 school buildings. And I want to underscore something. I didn't say highest performing. If you want to only look at highest performing, begin in the most affluent communities. Most rapidly improving are schools that were in the bottom 10% of their state 5 years earlier, now in the top 10% with the same student population, faculty, budgets. They said, go find them. They said, go find the 25 most rapidly improving middle schools, 25 most rapidly improving high schools. And then several foundations leading the list. The Gates Foundation gave us resources to actually send research teams into these schools and into these communities and study them intensely to see what they were doing differently than the rest of us. And my storyline tonight is what we found. What we found is they basically go through 3 stages. Stage 1, they spent a lot of time doing exactly what the leadership in this region, superintendents and board, asked me to do tonight, is they spent a lot of time talking about why do we need to change. You know the toughest schools to change? Those schools that think they're pretty good. Why would I want to do anything different? You know the easiest schools to change? The poorest performing. So you got to create a culture. Then they looked at what to change, and finally how. Forgive me, Commissioner King and the regents have heard me say this in front of them. What we did in New York State is we didn't go through the why and the what. We jumped instantly to how. Whether you like or dislike Obamacare, I think you would have to agree with me that the rollout has been less than spectacular. And if you don't like it, you're happy that the rollout was messed up. If you like it, you're dismayed by the rollout. We had the same issue in this state with Common Core. The rollout has been less than spectacular. So the naysayers are really happy. And those that think it's a pretty good idea are dismayed. So let's go back and look at what we need to do. And I'm not here to push or support the Common Core, but I am here to ask a very central question by the end of the evening, and this is it. You'll hear it at the end of the night. If not the Common Core, then what? Is status quo okay? Let's see. I think if you try to change schools before you understand why, it won't work. What did we learn from the nation's highest performing schools? Culture trumps strategy. And forgive me, how many school board members we have in the room? How many superintendents? How many building level administrators? Okay? For that group, they spend half their lives trying to convince everybody that things are good. It's a survival technique in America. Okay? We got any classroom teachers with us? Okay, parents. I mean, I know a lot of you are parents, but you're here kind of in your role as parent. Okay, well, if you try to change schools before you create a culture, you're going to be the cat. That's Commissioner King. And that's everybody who's being asked to change. In fact, anybody put a human face right on that dog right there? So why do we need to change? That's the reason. Anybody have a question? Charlie, explain it to him. Oh, you forgot.
70%?
Yeah, what's it mean? When I was asked to speak with the governors, what they had done is an interesting thing. They brought the Tea Party governors in. Anybody ever hear the term Tea Party? And they brought in what they thought were the 6 most liberal governors. Now, why did they bring the two ends of the spectrum? Because this nation has become politically polarized. And they said, maybe we can find some common ground in education. So they brought, those governors brought with them their senior executive staff, leadership of their state legislature, business leaders from their state, college presidents, superintendents. And I felt very honored to speak to the group, but I was totally confused as to why they had the first speaker. A lady that I have a lot of respect for, but I said, what does she know about K-12 education? Until she began. It was Dr. Condoleezza Rice. Now, Condi's a brilliant woman, but I said, why would she be here to talk about K-12 education? That was her opening slide. Ladies and gentlemen, 70% of young people in America today are no longer eligible for the military. 70% are no longer eligible. Do you know why? Because today you got to meet 5 requirements. The first one, you must be a high school graduate. They used to take the GED. They no longer take it. 30% of young people in America are not graduating from high school. Here's my hunch. That's probably none of your children by the fact that you're here. However, the next one might be part of your kids. Last year, 28% of high school graduates in this country had to take the second part if they wanted to go in the military. The military now has an entrance exam. They have an entrance exam. They never used to have an entrance exam. They always had this exam, but it used to be used for placement once you were in the military. It's called ASVAB. It is now an admission test, and it is math, science, and language arts. And they're revamping the test every 6 months. You know why they're revamping it every 6 months? Not to lower the standards, to raise the standards. Why? Because in the military, technology is critical to job performance. And if you mess it up, a colleague might get hurt. They might die. And that technology is changing so often, and it's so driven by academics, which I'm going to show you tonight, but not academics you and I took when we were in school. 28% of high school graduates in America last year failed the ASVAB exam. 7% of four-year college graduates failed it. Sometimes I take a group for a whole day. You know what I do? I take 45 minutes in the middle of the day and I give them the ASVAB exam. And I'm finding a very, very, very high rate of failure, even amongst those of us in education. How do you get 30% not graduating, 28% failing the test? How do you get 70%? Health-related issues leading the list, obesity, drug-related issues, legal-related issues, all the way up to incarceration. And the bigger issue is the number is increasing at the rate of 1% a year. And it's increasing at the rate of 1% a year for one reason on the list. Anyone want to guess what the reason is? Number 2. Because the test is getting harder. Predicted within 10 years to be 80% of our young people. Condi was done with her presentation. We go off in some breakout groups. I hadn't spoken, nobody knew me there yet. I go sit in the back of the room with all the CEOs. These are CEOs of some of our big-time companies in the country. And folks, they were livid. You know why they were so mad? They said, look, if they're not ready for the military, what makes you think in 2014 they're ready for the 21st century workplace? Yeah, they can go to work at a convenient market, but they can't earn enough to be self-sustaining. And the corporate leaders said to the conference organizers, we demand time on the program. We want to talk about this. And guess what they convinced all those governors and those legislators of? Folks, we have 70, headed to 80% of our young people functionally unemployable at a self-sustaining level, which means they are headed to public assistance. We have 70 to 80% of our kids headed to public assistance in this country. It is unsustainable as a nation. And it would be a credible crisis if the demographics didn't make it worse. This is America, 1950, by age group, every 5 years. So 0 to 4-year-olds, they were the first 5 years of baby boomers in 1950. In 1950, we had more young people under 5 than total population above 55 as a nation. If anybody can remember that far back or remembers your history lessons from that far back, early 60s, Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society movement. And we dramatically expanded Social Security. We introduced Medicaid and Medicare. The early discussions of prescription drugs. And there was a perception that there will always be a lot more young people than old people. And the old people won't live so darn long. But two things changed. Healthcare. We began to live longer. We went from spending very few years in retirement before death to more and more years. And by the way, you can see that women live longer. Jeff helped me understand why. He explained at dinner tonight to me that that's because women have a lot easier lives than us men. Another thing happened. Birth control. 1950, 1960, for every 1,000 women of childbearing age, they bore 120 children. We are at 60 now. So what happened? We went from a nation when most of our social programs were introduced, believing that there will always be a lot more young people than old, where there were more children under 5 than total population above 55, to a nation today, nationwide, where there are now more people over 55 than under 21. In the state of New York, we are older than the nation. We have more people over 55 than under 25. And 70 to 80% of those young people in this state headed to public assistance. How are we doing? Should I be a little worried for the love and grandkids? Because let me ask you, well, do this. When everybody in the room, turn around and just look at somebody sitting near you. Look at them. Pick somebody out, look at them there, and I want you to imagine something. I want you to visualize something for me. I want you to visualize, what are they going to look like in 10 years? Now, be nice. They're looking at you, too, okay? Because I'm going to make a prediction. In 10 years, they're either 10 years older or dead. Am I right? But looking around this room, I wonder how many in this room, 10 years from tonight, are going to be an advocate for schools rather than for continued support of the seniors. More children under 5. I'm saying more people over 55 than children under 25. It's a huge issue. And what makes it worse is the world has continued to change. The superintendent said it perfectly well. It's continuing to change. This is 2005. And here's Pope Benedict, okay? Can anybody in the room tell me what that person's doing right there? What are they doing? What's that? Camera, right? What is that camera really? It's not an old-fashioned camera, is it? What is it? Their cell phone. They're taking a picture. 2005. It was a novelty. Show me. Let me show you Pope Francis. Yeah. And it is symbolic of what technology has done to every sector of society, except one. Education. The very institution that purports to get kids ready for this changing world. How many in the room have ever heard of Wolfman Alpha? By a show of hands. Okay, about 4 people. Wolfman Alpha. How many have heard of Google? How many have Googled something in the last 48 hours? Here's my hunch. In the next 2 to 3 years, you won't Google. Now, Google's not going away. But if you follow Google lately, they're talking about Google Glasses, Google cars. Why? Because Google is a search engine that uses keywords and headers. That's how you Google. It's being replaced by more powerful search engines. One of them is Wolfman Alpha. Wolfman Alpha, you can ask it an open-ended question about anything, and it will answer it for you. This is how you spell Wolfman Alpha. Let me show you. This guy's going to come on. He's going to ask questions. He's going to type the questions in that little yellow bar right there. I didn't know if you'd be able to see the little yellow bar, so I put the big black bar on top, typed in the same questions as he does. The first question he asks is, how much is 2 plus 2? Not a trick question, folks. What's the answer? 4, okay? And the answer will appear right there. But watch. The questions get harder, quicker. They happen exactly as you see them and as fast as you see them.
But let me show you a little bit of what you can already do with Wolfman Alpha today. The basic idea of Wolfman Alpha is very simple. You type your input, your question, and Wolfman Alpha produces a result. Let's try something really easy. Okay, that's good. Now let's try something harder. How about some serious math? But you can type things in pretty much however you want. Here's what Wolfman Alpha produces. It's done the integral, and then it's showing us other things that it thinks we'll be interested in. How about something more real world? Let's ask it the GDP of France. Here's the result, and then it gives a plot of the history and so on. But we can dress up the question a bit if we want. We can say, what is the GDP of France? Question mark. Same result. Let's try this. What is the GDP of France / Italy? So we as humans can tell what this is asking. And so can Wolfman Alpha, and it gives us the result. But this is really making use of the fact that the data in Wolfman Alpha is organized so that it can actually be computed with. Okay, let's try something different. How about internet users in Europe? Now Wolfman Alpha is going to take what it knows and summarize it for us with a table and some graphs and so on. All right, how about some geography? Let's ask about Springfield. Well, there are lots of Springfields in the world, but Wolfman Alpha knows from GeoIP, from the internet address it sees for me, that I happen to be in Massachusetts right now. So it assumes that I mean the Springfield that's in Massachusetts. Of course, I could pick one of the others, too. But here it's giving me all sorts of information about Springfield, Massachusetts, like what cities it's near, and I could always drill down and see more if I'd like.
I'm going to stop it. It goes on forever. Ladies and gentlemen, right now on the market. You know where I learned about it? Learned about it from a group of high school kids. I often go to school districts and do a professional development day while I have the whole staff, and it's common that I do it in the afternoon. And so I was in Michigan to do one of these, and they said, well, you came in the night before, would you meet with a group of high school seniors? I said, I'd be glad to in the morning, so I met with them. One of the kids showed it to me. But he said, I show it to you, and you got to promise us one thing. And I said, what? That you won't tell our teachers this afternoon. And I said, why not? And they said, because we're using it to do our homework. If we have any classroom teachers in this audience, you ask the kids tomorrow. The kids know this. They're using it to do their homework. You know what else you can do? You can now put a topic in, the number of sources you would like quoted, the reading level you want it written at, and it will write up to a 16,000-word term paper for you. And one of the kids said to the other kid, yeah, I know I'll do it, but it didn't work. It got me in trouble. So I said, how'd it get you in trouble? He said, the teacher said it wasn't my work. It was too good. And the other kid said, yeah, but you could have fixed that. And by the way, the kid is right. You can enter the number of spelling, factual, or grammatical errors you need in your essay. It is on the market as we speak. It's called Wolfman Alpha. Before I go any further, some of you picked these up on the way in. Charlie is the only person I know so long, I'm going to give it to you. If anybody in the room would like a copy at the end of the night of my PowerPoint, exactly as you're seeing it, all I need on this thing is your email. My staff will send you the PowerPoint next week and then send you to a website where the slides are actually backed up by notes in case there's any part of this you want to talk to others about. So if you want one, just raise your hand. Charlie, would you?
Can I circulate them now? Or?
Yeah, pass them around. How many room on a device like this? Could be this, could be an iPhone, a BlackBerry, some handheld device. How many room on a device like this? Hands way up. Not part way up high, good. How many in your room don't own a device like this? Those that don't, forgive me. You're not living in the world that your kids are. Why? Gallup poll just out, over 98% of 14 to 18-year-olds own one of these things. Over 92% of 10 to 14-year-olds do. Anybody in the room got one they can hand me? Thank you very much. Can you get email on these things? Can you get total internet access on them? I have a problem with them at my age. Anybody know what my problem is with this thing? I can't see it. And who in their right mind can use this tiny little keyboard? The answer? The kids. Can they do it without looking? Can they do it within their pockets? Yeah. Do you let the kids use these when they take their state test? No, for very good reason. They would what? Cheat. Tell me how they would cheat. They go online, find the answer. What else might they do? They text each other. These darn kids. They might either use resources or work with others. By the way, you just got an email just as I was talking. Okay? Am I right? So the kids might use resources to work with others. How many of you said you wanted your kids to be independent? What are the two most basic skills? Use resources, work with others. What do we call that in school? Cheating. Ladies and gentlemen, I do understand why you don't let them use it. You got another one. You are a popular person. I got to hold it for a minute. I'll give it back to you. Wait a minute. Is this somebody in the audience doing this to us? Okay. This is a product that's been laying around for 3 or 4 years. Suddenly took off in the last couple months. Over 2 million have been sold since December. Whoops, let me go forward. I guess I don't have them in here. I had pictures of who they were. Over 2 million. Anybody want to guess what this is? It's a total computer and a watch. We went from mainframes to tabletops to laptops to handhelds to watches. Now I got a bigger problem. If I can't see this, and what the heck would the keyboard look like? No problem. It's called spot technology. It's got an integrated projection system. Push a keyboard on the side of the new technology. They talked about it for 4 or 5 years. It's now out. Push another button, whatever is on the face of the instrument is projected on the wall, tabletop, or piece of paper. 2 million sold in the last, since December. Not a joke. Every superintendent in the room, mark my words. Mark my words. By this spring, you're going to have a discussion with the board on the fact that kids cannot wear watches on test day. You know why? They're going online and get the answers. You don't let them use these because they might what? Cheat. You're not going to let them use watches. By the way, that's not a watch. They're putting in earrings and necklaces and bracelets and lapel pins again. And so you're going to have to say no jewelry. Bill Gates predicts that all this will continue to accelerate. By the way, tell me, does technology continue to accelerate? What keeps happening to technology? Does it get larger or smaller? How about capacity? How about cost? Gates predicts within 2 years, everything I've just showed you will be in buttons of clothes. Expensive, but in buttons of clothes. I've served on the advisory board for USA Today, the national newspaper. Where are the superintendents again? Okay, superintendents, I can get one of you on the front page of USA Today. If you'll be the first superintendent in the country to take to your board a new policy, because it's going to be in buttons of clothes. All kids in your school shall take all tests naked. If somebody gives you a hard time, say, look, I'm solving another problem, at least at the high school level. The boys will show up, okay? The truth is stranger than fiction. And of course, the Google glasses. So what are you going to do, pluck their eyes out here? So why is there a new state policy that the tests need to be taken online? And boards and schools saying, oh, that, you know how complicated that is? You can't stop it, folks. Has anybody in the room heard of the cloud? This whole issue of bandwidth? All the issues we're mechanically fighting with today, the cloud addresses. You can't keep it away. And they're going to use it in every sector of their lives. So I got a question. What in the heck are you going to test? Because do they know how to use the technology better than we do? So we keep it away. Oh, by the way, my grandmother taught in New York State, northern New York State, a little town called Perth, New York. Anybody know where Perth is? Okay. If Grandma was alive, she'd be 122 years old. My first year of teaching in Amsterdam High School, Grandma told me a story at the time I was amused by, but lately have thought back a lot. Do you know that in this state, there was a commissioner's regulation up until the Great Depression that said kids were not permitted to bring pencils to school? Yeah, it makes sense. You understand why? Because if the kids brought the pencils to school, and I'm teaching, they could be sitting in this room. How do I know what they're doing with their pencil? They could be drawing pictures. They could be writing each other notes. I have no control. And by the way, if they bring pencils, not all kids have the same kind of pencil. Some kids' families are more affluent than others, so some kids' pencils have erasures and other kids don't. By the way, they might steal each other's pencils. Or they might use the pencils in places they shouldn't, like on the restroom walls. So we had a commissioner's regulation. No pencils. And every school board in this state had a pencil budget. Until the Great Depression, when money became so tight, we began to say, wait a minute. We need to save money anywhere we can. Almost all the kids have got pencils. So why don't we change our mindset and say, bring your pencils and we will teach you the responsible use of pencils. Can anybody in their wildest imaginations draw a correlation? I don't have time tonight to talk about globalization. Other nations are passing us by. I head up a group called the International Center for Leadership and Education. We do work around the globe. Are you all aware that both India and China are in an intense discussion about expanding their school year? Both nations are. Both nations now go to school 243 days a year, 8.5 hours a day. Both nations are contemplating going to a 270-day school year. 8.5 hours a day, except on Saturday when it'll be 5.5. I am not suggesting for an instant we do that, but I am suggesting they are our competition. Oh, let me add, for those they choose to educate. See, my daughter Audrey would have had all drugs withheld by national policy at the age of 3 because of her epilepsy. She would have died within days. Paul was on life support at the age of 11 for 9 months. Maximum length in time in China, 48 hours. You want to talk about the ultimate lack of equity? How about life? But for those that do, they're going to hand our kids their lunch. And then demographics. We are acutely aware, rightly so, of many demographic issues in this country, from race to poverty. Let me give you one that I don't think we are talking about, however, enough, and that is young men. For every 100 women in college today, we now have 77 men. For every 100 women diagnosed with special ed needs, we now have 217 boys. For every 100 women diagnosed with emotional disturbances, we're now at 324 boys. For every 100 women who commit suicide 15 to 19, we now have 549 young men. For every 100 women incarcerated, we now have 1,430 young men. And you know the real challenge here? The real challenge is, the first one is enabling women, rightly so, positive thing, to move more and more into leadership roles in every sector of the work environment. But men are not assuming those responsibilities back in the home. And women, they've got the whole enchilada here. And then the fiscal issues. You live them every day. We got huge fiscal issues as a nation. We know that. And therefore, in this state and across the country, people said, time out. We said in '83, the nation at risk. By the way, did anybody ever hear of No Child Left Behind? This is not new stuff. And he said, time out. We got to do something different. But you know what? We're not listening carefully enough as a nation. Under the Common Core, does anybody know what this says right under the Common Core? College and career ready. It doesn't say or. And New York is one of the few states that is not intensely discussing that issue. It doesn't say college or career ready. It says college and. And you know what we hear as adults? We go back to our paradigm. College ready, we know what that is. That's college prep. Career ready, we know what that is. That's the CTE program over at Jeff Spocy's. It's not what it's saying. Let me try to show you what it is saying and why it's saying it. ACT did a survey last spring and asked high school teachers in this country, are college freshmen well or very well prepared for college? 89% of the high school teachers said well or very well prepared. 26% of the college professors thought the kids were prepared. 51.7% of our kids in our two-year colleges are in remediation. 19.9% of our kids in our four-year colleges are in remediation. And we have, how many people in the room, being in a college town, we must have some. How many work in higher ed? Okay. I said to the university presidents at the meeting I was at, we can solve this problem. Would you like me to tell you how? And they said, absolutely. I said, stop taking them. If they're not ready, don't take them. And you know what their response was? We can't do that. Can anybody tell me why they can't do it? Seats to fill. But what I'm going to show you is business isn't going to take them. What I'm going to show you, it's easier to go to college than it is to be self-sufficient in a job. But our entire paradigm has it the opposite, because it used to be the opposite in the middle of the last century. Let me keep going. U.S. 55.5% of the kids who entered their freshman year in 2012 made it to the second year in our two-year colleges. 65% of the kids in the four-year colleges made it to the second year. The flip side of it is that's our dropout rate in the first 12 months. And nobody's talking about it. If the secondary schools had even a fraction of that dropout rate, we'd be on the front page of every newspaper. At the end of 3 years, nationwide, we are graduating 29.1% of our kids in our two-year colleges. We are graduating 36.6% after 5 years in our four-year colleges. Remember, if you want the PowerPoint, I'm going to give it to you, and you'll get the notes behind it. Now let me give you the bad news. This was the good news. Let me give you New York State data. We are graduating 37.8% of our kids in our four-year colleges. And I'm totally aware of the community I sit in right now. And nobody's talking about it. but we're doing a heck of a lot better in our four-year colleges than our two-year colleges. Our graduation rate is 10.9%. And you know what every school district does? On graduation night, they say with glee, how many kids are going to college? I challenge every superintendent and board in this room to report out, do a follow-up this spring, and report out of the kids who graduated 2 and 4 years ago who went to college, how many made it. So maybe the answer must be career ready. That must be where we're succeeding. Let's see how we're doing. Last month, 13 million people on unemployment. That doesn't count all the people that ran out of the 99 weeks. It doesn't count all those recent college graduates, 3/4 of the audience raised their hands about, because they're not eligible for unemployment because they've never been employed. But last month, we had 3.8 million jobs in this country that have been open for 6 consecutive months that pay in excess of $50,000 a year. And they cannot fill them. Can anybody in the room tell me how that's possible? How can you have 3.8 million jobs, pay over $50,000 a year, open for 6 straight months, and 13 million people on unemployment? It's a skill gap. It's a total skill gap. What we're not telling kids is what you major in matters a lot. A lot. Now, most of them don't make it, but of those who do make it, 53.6% under the age of 25 are either jobless or underemployed. These are the 10 most common majors in American universities last year. Number 1 is business. Number 2 is general studies. What is that? It is no major. It is come, stay as long as you would like. 3, social science and history. 4, psychology. Now let me give you the next 10 most industrialized nations of the world, right behind it. Business remains number 1. General studies falls to last. Engineering technology, 8th in this country, 2nd in the other industrialized nations. 3rd in the other industrialized nations, computer information sciences. 4th, health professions. What you major in matters a lot. Why does it matter so much? Because technology is changing the face of the American workplace. It's called the missing middle. If we go back to the 80s, the 90s, first part of this century, a lot of people are still talking about the 21st century like it's something that's going to come in the future. We're the second decade into it. But what happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, things that were kind of routine, concrete, sequential, began to become eliminated from the American workplace because the technology could do it faster, less expensive, and more accurately. What has happened with the increase in sophistication of the technology, it is now going after the middle wage jobs. And if you're in this middle and your job is displaced, if you don't have the skills to go up here, you're going to go down here. I had the opportunity to be a reviewer of a report that's going to be released in April from the U.S. Department of Labor. They've taken a series of jobs and made predictions of what will happen to these jobs in the next 5 years. And the first one, they predict that telemarketers will decline by 99% in the next 5 years. Hooray, you think. to be replaced by what? Technology, far more sophisticated than the person, and you won't know whether you're talking to a person or a technology. One that's begun to already dramatically been declined in the last 20 years, but those that are left predicted to drop by 96% in the next 5 years. Secretarial administrative assistants. Why? Technology. Look at this one, folks. Accountants and auditors, and I know we got some financial people in the room. Why? If I can write an algorithm, basic accounting, basic auditing, technology can do it better. But I don't know a single university in the country that is therefore adjusting the number of kids they have in accounting classes. Why? We got faculty. That's how the system is set up. Retail salespersons, why the big drop? Young people don't shop online. I mean, they do shop online. Technical writers. My wife has a master's degree in technical writing from RPI. She doesn't like this data. Why? Routine at Wolfman Alpha. Oh, before I go any further, and I want you to be honest. And somebody sitting right next to you is going to know if you're honest. Did anybody in this auditorium in the last 15 minutes Google Wolfman Alpha? Very good. Did you find it? Does it have an app? Yep. You know how much? $2.99. Did you buy it already? And all the kids have got it. Machinist, pilots, economists. See, it's no longer just the low-end jobs that are being displaced. Health technologists, not to be confused here with direct patient care. Direct patient care goes up. The technologists go down because of the technology.
Why do pilots go down?
Because we won't need them.
Because we're not going anywhere?
No, because it's automated. Okay. Less and less. You don't need the whole cockpit full of pilots. Anybody wear a Google car? How many wear a Google car in California? On the road right now. No drivers. Scares the living daylights out of me. Although I've seen some people that I think I just do not have. One other issue, cost of higher ed is out of sight. It's been twice the rate of inflation for the last 17 years. Average student last year left college $35,200 in debt, and that's not the average graduate. That's the average leaver, with or without a degree.
Do you have any information on online learning?
Online learning? Yeah, online learning is exploding, okay, and it does cost less. Let me tell you the issue, in my opinion, about online. And Jeff, I'm meeting with, that's why I was talking to Dan White, what I'm going to talk to you about next, on March 25th with all the DSs in the state on this one. Online companies, you know, the one we know, probably hear the most about is University of Phoenix. But University of Southern New Hampshire is one that's taken off. There's a number of them. In Michigan, yeah. What you need to pay a lot of attention to if you're in higher ed is not simply what the online is doing, but gaming. Gaming. How many of you have seen any of the kids play the games? Are they a little addictive?
Oh, you mean the games online?
Games online, yeah. You might say, what's this got to do with online? I'm going to show you in a moment. The gaming, okay? Now, it's addictive, isn't it? Okay, is the player in control? They control it. It's based upon growth. It gives them immediate feedback. Almost every major online company has either just done this or in the intense discussion to merging with the gaming companies to drive gaming as a methodology within the online delivery system. Why? Learners in control, addictive. Think about, there's one of the companies called Learning Through Sports. There has never been a pass play in football that is not a math problem. If you think about sports, it's basically applied math and science. And so they've developed all these games that teach increasingly sophisticated math and science through gaming, merging with the online provider. And then the third, for the real trifecta here, they are now all in discussions with major publishers. They are your direct competition in the next 3 to 5 years. They are a fraction of the cost. They are addictive. Kids love them. Or did we think all this had nothing to do with schools? Yeah, you see your grandkids. I see them. And by the way, I don't like it. But I also don't like the aging process anymore either. I just wish it would slow up. Another issue. This is the increase in inflation in this country in food since 1978. Food has gone up 210%. The consumer price index has gone up 240%. Shelter, housing, has gone up 360%. We all know medical care has gone up 580%. This is the increase in the cost of higher education in America. With 10.9% graduation rate in our 2-year colleges and 39% in our 4-year colleges. How are we doing? 70 to 80% of our young people headed to public assistance. More people over 55 than under 25. But while all this happens, you want to have a revolution in an American school? Try to change a bus schedule, see what happens to you. Change the school calendar by 2 days. We'll have 4 committees over 6 months to discuss this momentous decision. Don't get mad at me. Is it possible that our schools look like museums? And we've become the curators? That is why there's a growing call for college ready and career ready. The question is, are they ready for either? So let me just give you a couple quick snapshots of what, one statement on how, and I'll wrap it up. Is reading important, yes or no? A little or a lot? Okay, the study I'm going to give you next has been done 3 times. Altogether, class, how many times?
3.
First time was 12 years ago, second time 6 years ago, third time last year. What they simply did was look at high schools. They took 75 high schools in the United States, 2 from the state of New York. Every state had at least 1. And they said, let's see what the kids have to read in 11th and 12th grade English language arts. 11th and 12th English language arts. All together, class, what grades did I say?
11th and 12th.
Okay. In what discipline? And they Lexiled it. How many know what the Lexile framework is? Okay. Well, it's a yardstick to measure reading. It's a 2,000-point scale to level rate the difficulty of reading. It's like a yardstick. You know, a yardstick has 36 inches. It's called a criterion reference measurement. This is a 2,000-point scale for reading. This is where the materials fell in those 75 high schools. And it tells you nothing. It tells you absolutely nothing other than an opening reference point. I don't want to get too technical, but it is something called interquartile range. So it throws out the bottom 25% of the materials in the top 25% because you don't want to be pulled by extremes. It's called interquartile range. They followed those kids to college from those 75 high schools. Didn't matter if they went to a community college, to a liberal arts college, to an Ivy League school, wherever they happened to go, State University. Freshman, sophomore, English Lit. That's where it falls. Not surprising. You would expect kids in college to read a little bit higher level, and they do. Third column was our first gee whiz moment. Remind me, what discipline is the first column? English Language Arts. What grades? The third column are the exact same 75 high schools, except it's all the other 11th and 12th grade classrooms. In every high school we've looked at in the United States, the English Language Arts departments have the lowest reading requirements of any discipline in American schools. And there's a reason for that. English Language Arts is predominantly fiction in a world that increasingly requires what? Nonfiction. And here's the problem. In the state of New York, we use English Language Arts as the discipline to teach reading. Fiction-based. Common Core changes that. What discipline do you think had the highest reading requirements? So I thought it would be science too, but I would have bet my life it was going to be science. It was second. Third, guess again. Science is second. Math is third. Social studies is second to the bottom. Number one, every school we looked at. Career and tech ed. You know why? They got to read a manual. And how many of you, since a week ago Sunday, have had your car clock off by 1 hour? Got the manuals, can't you read? Are not part of your definition of literacy. Anybody in this room, 2014, want an auto technician putting brakes on their car who can't read a manual? Anybody in the room want an electrician wiring your house who can't read a manual? Anybody in this room want to have happen what happened in my home? A home health aide administering drugs to your disabled daughter who couldn't read the prescription drug manual. Got the dosage off by 16 times. I got a question. Jeff, who they putting in career and tech ed in the region? The top 1/3 of the kids? No, because they're going to go to where? So let's see. Freshman, sophomore year in college, other than English Lit, read pretty high. Military, gave you Condi information already, so you know it's very high. It's just not very long because the military is so prescriptive. They then asked 100 parents in each of the 75 communities, 7,500 parents of teenagers. Give us what you want entry-level workers to read. What level workers? And that's where it fell. I'm sorry. Personal use, I messed it up. Personal use, ask them, what do they have to read to become independent? To become independent. And they said contracts, insurance information, loan applications, materials to get jobs. That's where it fell. We asked the 10 largest employers in each of 75 communities, 750 employers nationwide, entry-level jobs. Do the workers have to read in your companies? And that's where it falls. Please compare these 3 columns to the first column. Last column, SATs, ACTs, and advanced placement. Lower than entry-level jobs. Lower than the military, lower than personal use. Anybody aware of what David Coldman, who heads up College Board, announced on Monday? It was this research right here. They got so much pressure. Because, see, what happened was 12 years ago, the American Association of University Presidents went to College Board because they had a very real problem. They had to take kids across multiple state lines. And every state had their own testing program. And they had to take kids from multiple high school graduating classes because kids go to one college, drop out, go to the next. And so they said, we need a uniform way to evaluate them nationwide. They said it's the SATs, ACTs, and advanced placement. So they asked them to freeze it in place, and they did 12 years ago. The next thing I'm going to say is the single most important thing of the evening. 12 years ago, last column, same place it is today. 12 years ago, it was the highest column on the chart. What happened? It all moved, except right there and right there. By the way, we are in the process of doing this in the state of New York right now, this spring, for just New York State data. We'll talk more about it. We did a little bit with the DSs last time. We're going to talk more on the 25th about it. That's what they need. That's where we are. So let's see how we did. Here's every state in the country. Okay? The only way you can compare across states right now is NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. And every state has a cut point for NAEP. Oh, man, I'm sorry you can't. I'm going to go up because I want to make sure you can read the rest of the chart. When I moved it over, you can't read the top, so bear with me for just a second. This is fourth grade reading. Sorry, just hang on for a minute. I don't know if this one's going to work. Sorry. Just hang with me for a second because how it is, I can't pop it out. I got to take it off screen to pop it. What I want, if you bear with me, I think you're going to find it's useful for me to do what I'm doing. I'm just going back to try to find an earlier New York State slide here. I apologize for that. But now let's hope I can go back up on screen. Hey, Steve. Okay, thank you. Okay. I don't know what you did, Steve, but thanks. Okay. Let me go back, show you fourth grade reading. Okay? This is fourth grade reading. Remember I told you I'm going to give the PowerPoint with the notes. I can't put all 50 states on a PowerPoint slide and have you be able to see it. And so I just put 8 of them. 2005, Mississippi had 88% of their kids in their state proficient in reading. North Carolina had 82. Massachusetts only 48. Now, I don't mean to be derogatory about Mississippi and North Carolina, but does anybody in the room think they have the highest performing schools in the country? Absolutely. So what's your guess about their state test? Their standards were low, right? And they were, because when you look at the equivalent NAEP score that equals proficiency, it was 161. Massachusetts, it was 234. Okay? But look at Mississippi in 2009 now. They went from first in the country to what? Last. What do you think they did? They raised their standards. See, they went from 161 cut point to 210. Make sense? I asked a basic question. Did they do the right thing? Yeah. But what happened to the failure rate? Went up. There's only one state on this list that used the research I just showed you to establish their cut point. Anyone want to guess what state it was? Massachusetts. So what's Mississippi still got to do? Got to go up. Let's go back and look at New York. 2005. Our cut point was 207. Look what we did from 2005 to 2009. We lowered the standard. At the exact same time, pushed by technology, global competition, the reading requirements in every sector of society was going up. We actually lowered ours, and that's where it falls. It's fourth grade reading. This is 05, this is 09. What did New York State attempt to do this past year? They raised it, and they raised it halfway up. And what happened to the failure rate? Here's the problem. They never explained to anybody why they were doing it or how it was going to happen or let people understand ahead of time it was going to happen. Now, I'm not saying did they do it right, but did they do the right thing last year by raising the standard? Let me show you what we did in 8th grade reading. In 2005, we had the highest cut point in the country. We're now in the middle of the pack. Fourth grade, math. We were low, and we have remained low. But look what we did to 8th grade math. We have the 4th lowest cut point in the nation in mathematics, and all our kids think they're doing just fine. Have I got your attention yet? What's the right thing to do? Raise the standards. But you know what I hear from everybody? Our schools, we got good schools. Against what standard? One more final piece. We have done a detailed analysis of every state testing program in the country, including New York State's, under contract. We evaluated every test question on every test in every grade. What 2 numbers on this chart do you think we found nearly all the questions to be at? 1 and 2 or 4 and 5? What do you think, folks? What two numbers on this chart will our kids need to be able to function at in order to become independent? I want to suggest to you, the trick on the new test wasn't that they were just harder. It was that they were application-based. And the problem is you can't get to level 4 and 5 one discipline at a time. The real world doesn't function in disciplines. The real world is totally interdisciplinary. Well, our kids need to function at 4 and 5. Let me show you a piece of research being released in April. It's not American schools, it's Canadian schools. 3 neural researchers, this is their names at the bottom. Remember, I'm going to send you my PowerPoint. There's been an advancement in imaging technology. I can put an MRI on her head, imaging technology, and a neural researcher can actually watch her solve math problems. They watch brain activity, yeah. And what they did was take groups of 8th graders, put the technology on them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 1 week. And here's the composite result. Anybody want to guess what the yellow is? When they're in school.
Flatline. Oh, now there's a surprise.
You know when they're most active? On their video games. They're more active when they're sleeping. Why? Because the state has never seen a standard it doesn't like, and our kids are coming to school to watch the teachers work, and the teachers are working extraordinarily hard. Less is more. You want to get to level 4 and 5? Can't do it one discipline at a time? So I'll spin off 3 quick things and close. What do we find in the nation's highest performing schools? Most rapidly improving elementary, middle, and high schools. 25 each category. 25 for 25. None of the schools knew each other. They cut across 23 different states. Every one of them was looping their teachers. Y'all know what looping is? 2nd grade teacher goes 3rd grade with a class. Why does it work? Relationships. I know the kids at the end of the year. I can connect up with them and their parents, and it's easier for me to learn the 3rd grade curriculum as 25 new kids and their parents. That's how I also get to relevance, when I know the kids, with the projects and activities, especially with the ability to have digitized delivery strategies and techniques today. Second thing we found, middle school and high school. 25 middle schools, 25 high schools, 50 schools in total. Guess what 43 of them are doing? Looping their teachers. It's not just elementary. What grades are they looping? 8th to 9th. Oh my God, doesn't he know they're different buildings? It's exactly what I know. If the kids were the priorities, why would you ever take them out of a smaller, cloistered environment when at that age they're going through physical and emotional changes in their own bodies they have no clue how to deal with, and put them in a larger, more disconnected environment? 47 of the 50 middle schools and high schools eliminated department chair people. Why? Ultimate gatekeepers to the past. Keeping the disciplines nicely isolated. What did they do instead? Created chair people of interdisciplinary departments. Took a math teacher, science teacher, language arts teacher, art music teacher, put them in a team together, gave them the same group of kids all day long, and gave the teachers a common planning period. 24 of the 25 high schools had no electives in 12th grade. Guess where they had all their electives? 9th grade. Why? When do we lose the kids? Ask anybody, where's the dropout? Find out what they like, give them the electives then. 21 of the 25 required a career focus in their senior year. These schools are going to all come together on June 22nd to 26th, which are terrible days for New York State. But they're coming together in Orlando, Florida. We bring them together for 4 days, and all they're going to do is tell their story. They're going to talk how they did it. None of them did it exactly alike. I I know it's a terrible week. It's a national meeting. It wasn't scheduled for New York. But when you go to leave on the way out, there's something called model schools. If you pick it up, it will tell you about it. As tough as it is, I still suggest you try to find some teachers and some administrative staff. Love to have school board members there. Come and see what these schools are doing, how they're doing it. And then next fall, those that come to the conference, we're going to open these schools up to site visits. And we want you to actually go visit some of those communities in schools. We want teachers to talk to teachers, principals to talk to principals, superintendents to talk to superintendents. They're not working harder than you are. They're working differently. When you go to leave, the announcement of that model schools and a couple other materials back there on the table you can pick up going out that door. If you want a copy of my PowerPoint from today, just fill out that yellow sheet. The only other thing is on the bottom of this yellow sheet, let me mention it, and I don't want you to check it unless you have a real interest in it, but it says something about needs assessment. On the left-hand side, there's 2 items. It says model schools and needs assessment. We recommend the school districts that you actually bring in some people who have lived through what we just described and actually do a needs assessment on your school, and then give you very specific 3 or 4 or 5 things that they think your community and your staff might be ready for that would begin to move you down track. It's called needs assessment. If you have any interest in having somebody do that, I will have a member of my staff call you and just talk to you about it. If you have an interest, check that one that says needs assessment, but don't check it unless you expect somebody actually to call you and just talk to you about it. Find out a little bit about your district, what it might look like. It's not expensive, it's not complicated, but we think that and the model schools are the best way to get moving in terms of change. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Jeff, thanks for the opportunity of being with you. I'll stay up front if anybody has a question. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.